Hello, welcome to this episode of The Derek Show, where I'm going to talk about a problem I caused when I tried to remove my hot end while still hot and running and plugged in. So what I did was I used these pliers here to grab the metal piece, but accidentally touched the heater cartridge, and I created a short circuit that actually burnt out the port to my motherboard. But this forced me to replace both my motherboard and my hot end. In this episode, I'm just going to focus on what I did to replace the motherboard. So anyways, now I just want to show you my new main board, and also I'll talk about how I taped up my base plate. That's to prevent it from falling when I unscrew all the screws. So the first step I'm going to do is just look at the base and see where the screws are, which I have to unscrew. Since I'm just opening up, I can undo the tape as well and let it fall out. That the fan connection will automatically come off. It won't cause any damage. But I just want to make sure I know where I have to unscrew before I start doing it. Now that I generally know what I have to do, I'm going to unscrew the first screw now, as you can see. Here now, I'm going to remove the next screw in order to open these up. So now here I removed what happens to be my last screw as I lost one of the screws from the base. And you can see it just falls open. You can see after I unscrewed it, the main board fell open, right? And then the connector got pulled off between the fan and the motherboard. So that's my mistake. I should have kept the tape on before and then just slowly remove the tape and open the cover and then pull out the connector for the fan before removing the baseboard. Now here is the motherboard that I'm going to remove. As you can see, it's screwed in, so I have to unscrew it. And you can see all the wires connected to it. So there's quite a few, right? You got some for like the thermistor for the thermistors for the bed and the nozzle, and then you have like for the hot end, the nozzle heater, that resistor, as well as the bed heater and the power from the main power supply, and then of course you have the X, Y, Z, and the extruder motors as well, right? So all that you got to make note of. You look carefully at the motherboard, as well as behind it, you'll see that it's marked off which port is for which of these components, and also whether it's which side is ground and which side is positive. Okay, so you got to make sure you get it all wired up correctly, otherwise it won't work. Looking at my main board there, my motherboard, you can see all the ports. I have like ports for my motors, controlling the axes, the X, Y, Z, and then as you can see the ports are labeled. The same as I go on top, I'll show you also the port to the sensors for the axes is also labeled, and the green part there above the heatsink with the little screws, that's like power supply for things like heaters, bed heater, nozzle heater, and fan for the nozzle fan. And of course those two ports in the center there for the bed fan and the base fan. So take a good look, know where all the connections are, and notice on the cables they'll have tags indicating what they are for too. Do not lose those tags. Very helpful. Screen cable. Remove the nozzle thermistor. Yeah, that's just the order I chose. step here, as you can see, is I'm removing the bed thermistor. If you watch carefully, I try not to grab the cables. I try to grab the actual plugs themselves. Don't grab the wires, otherwise you might actually pull them out. The cable I take out is for the Z axis. Make sure careful taking out and note that on the collar it tells me what it's for. It's now clear and easy to remove is obviously the Y-axis sensor cable, right? So right now, still removing the sensor cable. Now the last sensor cable, the one for the X-axis, to stop it from going beyond the X-axis line. Take that out as well now. Okay, now here comes one of the more challenging parts of replacing the main board, the motherboard. As you notice now, I'm at the point where I can remove the heater cables, like for the bed heater and for the nozzle heater, as well as the fan, the bed fan, right? Basically the ones that take more power. And to do so, you have to understand that the way these the wires plug into the motherboard. So in that green part there, right, where the screw's on top, what happened is there's a plate in the hole there that the wire has to go in on top of the plate, and then the plate has to be moved up with the screw, right? So left is to lower the plate. So you can put the wire on top of it, and then turn to the right to tighten it so the plate goes up and holds the wire in position. That's very important. Sometimes you accidentally put the wire underneath, it doesn't work. You have to put underneath the plate, it doesn't work. So you have to be very careful and make sure it goes in on top, like closer to you, and then screw so that the plate goes up and holds it into place. The yellow wire belong to the fan on the side of the enclosure. Right? I think they use to cool the part. So here I wasn't careful, but I should have grabbed the connector and pulled it out. Otherwise I might damage the wire. So at this point now, I'm ready to remove the main power. That's what I do. That's basically connect the motherboard to the power supply. So in this particular instance, I left the motor control cables to the last. So that's what I'm doing now. So I'm going to remove the X, Y, Z, and extruder cables. And as you look at the cable plugs at the cables, they have little markers on them, like the little rings that have the letters, like for the axis, X, Y, or Z, as well as E for extruder. So I took them all out, and this time I was more careful. I pulled from the connector part, not the wires. So at this point, all the cables are loose, and I'm ready to take the main board out of my printer. But first, I want to take a look and see where are the screws that I have to remove, because sometimes when you look at it, it's hard to see. So I identified the screws first that I have to unscrew to get the main board out, and then I'm going to unscrew them. So as you can see, you can't really get to the screws without pulling out all the cables first. So that's why we have to go through that process in the beginning. But also to carefully do it so you know exactly what port holds which cable when we put in the replacement motherboard. So now it's clear. I'm unscrewing the first screw. So at this point, I'm just now removing the last few screws because everything is clear. I can see it's easy, right? So that's important. And then now we can take the motherboard out and look at it. Look at the ports, understand it, so that when we insert the new one, then we know exactly where to plug in each cable. So as you can see, what I have here is version 4.2.7 Creality motherboard, and it's the one with the 32-bit silent stepper motor driver. It was a nice one. And this is the one I accidentally shorted out when I touched the heater, the nozzle heater with my pliers when it was on. So I'm going to replace this with the same type of motherboard. So it's going to be a straight one-to-one swap. Now that I took out my old motherboard, I got my new main board. It's exactly the same 32-bit Creality for version 4.2.7 with the silent stepper motor driver. The first thing I did was, because I got a new nozzle heater as well, I put the nozzle heater cable first into the power section, right? Those green holes, and I put it on top of the metal plate. You can't see it, so the wires are closer to me than to the 3D printer, and I screwed it to push the plate up to lock the wires in. Now, I don't really like doing this. I prefer to get one that's compatible with the connectors, so I can have them. They didn't have any on sale at the time. So as you can see, it is trouble to put the wires back into the motherboard. So it's always better, to buy like some wires with a connector with the plug on one end, put in the motherboard, and then buy the part like the heater or nozzle heater or the thermistor with the other plug. So you can, so if one of those tiny accessories burn out, you don't have to open up the bottom of your printer again. You can just take out the nozzle heater or the thermistor or whatever, and then just get a new one in and attach it and plug it in to the cable from the motherboard. The next, so the next thing I did was I attached the bed heaters to the main board. I decided to do the heaters first because those are the hardest wires to plug in, right? Because you have to get the connector end into the what do you call it? Into the on top of the metal plate in the green part, and then screw so the metal plate push up and push it against the top of the board, which is facing me. So, but of course, as you can see here, first I double checked. I checked the main board to make sure I was putting the wires into the right port. So now what I'll do is I'm gonna next attach the base fan. That also goes into those plates, which are hard to press against the wires. So I just want to get the toughest stuff done first and properly. So now with the hardest attachments done, I want to reattach now the X-axis sensor, which is easier this time. This is just plugging it in. Right? No more wires and tightening plates against the top type of thing. Now I'm going to plug in the Y-axis sensor cable. So next, of course, I plug in the next sensor, which is the Z-axis. Quite easy to plug the wires. Now next is my extruder fan, which luckily again takes a connector, so I can just plug it into the main board. Also, if you look down the cable, you notice that, at least for mine, I also have another connector at the other end, so that my extruder fan can just plug into that connector with its plug. That way I never, in the future, if I just have to change the fan, I never have to open up the bottom and the base port. So as I go along the main board now, the next part is the main power plug. So again, main power from the, if you look at from the power supply, there's no connector, just the bare wire. So again, I put it on top of the plate and then screw it tight, lift the plates up to hold the wires in place. This actually is easier because this particular port, these two ports, the ground and the positive are by themselves, so it's easier to access. So next now is look at, I think this is the last bit, is the almost the last, is the row of ports at the bottom of the main board. Those are for the four motors, right? And they're all labeled at the back. And you can match them up with the connectors, because the wires, the connectors they also have that little collar that explains whether it's the X motor, the Y motor, the Z motor, which moves the bed up and down, and of course the extruder motor, which turns to move the filament up through the Bowden tube and into the hot end, right? So putting those in is easy. Like I said, they're connectors and plugs. You just plug them in. Lots of fun. So now I just plug in the cable to the LCD screen into the main port. And that's simple. As you can see, there's a big flat connector port for it, and you just plug the ribbon cable onto it. Very easy. Now comes the tough part, reattaching the main board. Now, as you can see by position, I left this to last on purpose because if I screwed in the main board first, it would have been easier to do. It's been harder though to plug in the connectors into the port, right? Or attach the wires into those plates and screw screw it tight and tight, because it's all in those tight spots against the edge of the printer. So I always leave that to the end. So now you got to be careful now, because now with all the wires attached, it's bulky. It's hard to fit it in. So I have to carefully wiggle it around, find the screw, and do it one screw at a time, and slowly, in case if you accidentally put in a screw too tight and then you realize that the board is screwed in the wrong way, you have to unscrew it again and put back. So do a little bit at a time and don't put in the screws too tight. And watch how I do this step by step. I videoed the whole thing so you can see it and copy it. So now I have to reattach the fan that's attached to the baseboard back onto the main board. And it's easy with a plug, but the problem is I got to make sure I close the main board. I close the baseboard afterwards so it doesn't fall and snap out the plug. So now it's time to reattach, close up the bottom. So I put the bottom plate back on, and as you can see, I'm taping it. So that way it doesn't fall and then pull out the fan connector cable, right? So that's why I use the tape. I can hold it there and take my time to screw things. So now, as you can see, with the bottom base plate taped against the printer, I don't have to worry about it falling and pulling out the fan cable in the process. So I can take my time now, screwing in the final screws, as you can see now. It's a lot easier to do, right? Especially when you don't have someone. Well, you may have someone to help. It's kind of a dull job to ask me to hold it for you, so it's better to take it. So that's it, basically. I just finished screwing the main board in, and overall, it takes maybe about 45 minutes to do this whole thing. You can watch the video and get a good idea how long it's going to take and what the most efficient thing to do while doing replacing the main board. So thanks for watching the Derek Show again. I hope to see you again. Bye.